for doing this. How would you assess the state of free speech in the West right now?
It is seriously in peril. It's often in peril, but it's more in peril than ever before. And there are a couple of different reasons. Obviously, there's been an attempt on the part of the EU to undermine the ability for people on this populist right to express certain views. And there's been a lot of attention paid to that. But the far more significant threat to free speech, and you and I have been talking about this, Tucker, since all the way back in 2023 after October 7th.
For decades, free speech has been treated as a settled principle, something foundational, untouchable. But in recent years, that assumption has quietly started to crack. Glenn Greenwald is a journalist who spent his career covering power, censorship, and the boundaries of dissent. And in this conversation, he argues something unsettling, that the biggest threat to free speech today isn't coming from where people expect. This is Synthesize, where we turn long podcast conversations into their most important ideas. It's easy to talk about free speech in abstract terms, rights, laws, principles. But the real test isn't theory. It's what actually happens when people say something controversial.
A lot of draconian changes to just obliterating free speech in the name of protecting this foreign country, the most brazen of which was, I don't know if you saw, but the Australians, after Bondi Beach, at the insistence of the Israelis, passed a law banning a whole bunch of common political slogans that offend Israel, like from the river to the sea and things of that nature. And a bunch of Australian citizens were angry that they're not allowed to express this political view any longer, or else they'll be arrested. And they went as kind of civil disobedience wearing a t-shirt that said, "From the river to the sea," and each and every one of them was arrested.
That's the shift. Free speech doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes at the edges, starting with speech that feels uncomfortable, unpopular, or offensive. And once that precedent is set, the definition of unacceptable can expand. The justification is almost always the same: harm. But what counts as harm has quietly been redefined.
Regulations got passed saying that if you criticize Israel, you're not eligible for these kinds of programs. And what Israel did about 10 years ago was promulgated this very new, radically expanded hate speech code called the IHRA, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Act. And it takes very benign and common views about Israel or about Jews, such as Israel is a racist society, or you can compare Israel to the Nazis, or the Jews played a role in killing Jesus, a whole bunch of other.
This is the conceptual turning point. If speech is violence, then restricting speech becomes self-defense. And once that idea is accepted, the line between protection and control starts to blur, fast. What makes this moment especially confusing is how politically inverted it feels. The traditional roles have flipped.
Is still in place, and yet this is all over our academic institutions.
And this all happened under the cover of combating wokeness, combating the left-wing death grip on American higher education, which is real. I mean, it's the most real thing of all. But rather than break that grip, it hasn't been broken. It's still in place completely. This was used as like an opportunity to restrict the inherent free speech rights of Americans, and very few people noticed.
This isn't a left versus right story anymore. It's a power story. Different groups, different justifications, but often the same outcome, limiting what can be said and who gets to say it. So why now? Why does this pressure on speech feel so much more intense than before?
Operate in the sewers and shadows of the Capitol. But over the last 3 years, the pro-Israel lobby has had to come out into the open so much more than ever before and really just be so explicit in calling everyone anti-Semitism, advocating for speech restrictions. And the reason is because there has been a very radical and, from an Israeli perspective, an extremely alarming collapse in support for Israel among Americans in basically every demographic group other than conservatives over 50. So basically like decades long.
This is where the conversation shifts from principle to strategy. When institutions lose trust, they don't always adapt. Sometimes they tighten control instead. Not because it's right, but because it's effective in the short term. But control has a limit, and according to Greenwald, we may be approaching it.
most of them aren't available off the top of my head because there's so many.
It's where does this go? Like, 'cause this is totally incompatible with our founding documents, with the history of the United States, and with American culture itself. It's too much. And so it either becomes much, much worse or it goes away. I don't think we can stay where we are. That's my instinct. What's yours?
Well, I'm Jewish, so when people talk about anti-Semitism,
This is the tension at the center of the moment. Too much restriction creates resistance, but too little control from the perspective of institutions feels like chaos. So the system oscillates, pushing, pulling, trying to find a balance. Here's where things get even more complicated, because attempts to suppress certain ideas can actually amplify them.
anti-Semitic because you're blaming a bunch of Jews who had nothing to do with Israel for what you're criticizing.
Right.
Yet, look how often the people who are on the other side of that debate, who love Israel, who constantly say they worry about anti-Semitism, they conflate Israel and Jews all the time. And I think this is the problem. So if you say,
Yes.
Israel killed, 10,000 children, they'll immediately say, oh, look, blood libel. He's accusing Jews of killing, 10,000 people or having, raped soldiers. And no, you didn't accuse Jews, you accused Israel. But when they conflate it,
When criticism is labeled as something more extreme, it doesn't eliminate the criticism. It delegitimizes it and pushes it into spaces where it becomes harder to engage with rationally. That's how polarization deepens. And over time, people notice. They may not articulate it perfectly, but they feel it.
the standing of that country in the United States, the thing that would alarm me the most is that this is now happening on the right. I can't imagine a 2028 primary campaign in the Republican Party that does not prominently feature this question. And I also can't imagine that there's not going to be somebody like a major candidate who's not purposely occupying that lane of saying, we were told that we weren't going to have any more foreign wars or foreign attachments. One of the major problems is Israel. We don't hate Israel. We don't have anything against it. We just need to stop being responsible for funding it.
This is where speech becomes a political force again, not just as an idea, but as a lived experience. When people feel like they can't speak freely, it doesn't make them disengage. It makes them move. 3 ideas to take away from this conversation. First, free speech rarely disappears overnight. It fades gradually, starting with the speech people are least willing to defend. Second, the definition of harm is the battleground. Expand it far enough and almost any speech can be restricted. Third, control creates resistance. The more tightly speech is managed, the more pressure builds beneath the surface. And maybe the most important question isn't whether free speech is under pressure. It's this: at what point does protecting people from harmful ideas become more dangerous than the ideas themselves? If this kind of breakdown helps you think differently, you'll probably enjoy the next video too.